Hi everyone, my name's Kate. Tell me, what fairy tales did you like as a kid? My favorite was the one about Cinderella, probably because I had a lot in common with her. Except, over time, I realized that my life is very different from a fairy tale. Subscribe to the channel, and you'll find out how Cinderella should have really ended. My family was extremely poor. My mom had died when I was really young, and that's how I got a stepmother who didn't love me, and a half-brother who made my life miserable. Doesn't that sound similar to the beginning of Cinderella? That's why, since childhood, I'd been dreaming that one day, a real prince would come along and he'd take me away from this nightmare. However, time passed and still a prince was nowhere to be seen. I graduated from high school and I got into culinary college. It wasn't a prestigious one, but the tuition there was free. For me, this was a great opportunity to move to a campus away from my terrible family. And that's where I met Rhonda. We immediately became best friends. She was also from a dysfunctional family, just like me, and we had a lot in common. Naturally, one evening, I told her about dreaming as a child of meeting a prince. Rhonda said that my fairy tale could well become a reality and told me about her plans for life.
You won't get anywhere without support, so find yourself a rich guy who'll help you,
she said. That was exactly what she was gonna do. And that got me thinking, what if my new friend was right? So we started going to college, and very soon, Rhonda began to disappear somewhere after classes. She told me she found a rich guy who was driving her around in an expensive car and buying her whatever she wanted. To be honest, I grew really envious of her. So, one day, I decided that I would get a boyfriend like that as well. I signed up for a dating website, and I started texting different guys. I spent several days doing that, but I really only managed to come across some poor students. Suddenly, a guy called Andrew messaged me. He immediately caught my attention because he was standing next to a cool car in his profile photo. Is it yours? I asked him.
Of course. Do you want to go for a ride?
He replied. I realized that he'd been the one I was looking for. In the evening, Andrew came to pick me up in his cool car and he drove us to a restaurant. I couldn't believe I'd managed to meet my prince. He was handsome and funny, and I felt he really liked me. He didn't take his eyes off me all evening. Andrew owned a car company that supplied exclusive sports cars to the most famous people in the world. I've got to admit that, as the evening went by, I grew to like him more and more. When he drove me back to campus, I even kissed him goodnight. So, yes, I started dating Andrew. Several times a week, we would drive around in his car and spend the whole evening in a club or a restaurant. I liked everything about Andrew. The only thing that bothered me a little was it seemed like he had some secret he wasn't telling me about. But I was so caught up in my relationship with my new boyfriend that I'd forgotten about Rhonda for a while. It seemed my friend wasn't doing all that well. She was sad and irritable. So, one day, I made her spill everything, and I found out that she'd broken up with her rich boyfriend. It turned out that she'd caught him with another girl, and then another one. That guy had apparently been cheating on Rhonda with a whole team of cheerleaders. I felt sorry for her. I imagined how awful she must be feeling. But at the same time, a terrible thought crept into my mind. What if my Andrew was the same? I thought about what that secret he could be hiding from me was, and I decided that somehow I would find out. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but one day, luck was on my side. One evening, I was working in one of the restaurants in the city. Some students, myself included, had been sent there by our college to get some practice in. I was helping the cooks in the kitchen when, all of a sudden, I saw a familiar face among the diners. It was my boyfriend. I felt overjoyed and I wanted to come out and greet him, but I saw him with a girl at his table. They were chatting sweetly and Andrew was holding her hand. I couldn't believe my boyfriend was on a date with someone else. No, everything was clear to me now. This was his secret. He was dating different girls and just lying to all of them. Furious, I stormed out of the restaurant through the service doors. How could he do this to me? At that moment, I saw his gorgeous car. Without hesitation, I took a large meat pounder from the kitchen and I began to smash it. Oh, revenge tasted sweet.
What have you done?
I heard someone say from behind me and I turned around. Andrew was standing in front of me, staring in horror at what was left of his car. At that moment, he looked so pathetic and scared that all of my feelings for him instantly evaporated. That's for cheating on me, I said angrily, and I walked away. That same night, I told Rhonda that my ex was also a liar. My friend smiled sadly and hugged me.
Just forget about him and move on. There are still lots of rich guys out there. We'll find others,
she said cheerfully. Well, that's exactly what I did. And after a couple of days, I forgot all about that traitor. Then, one day, a man called me after classes and said he was a lawyer. He told me that the owner of the car I'd smashed wanted to sue me and invited me to his office for preliminary negotiations. To be honest, I got so scared. I'd never broken the law before and I didn't know what was going to happen. However, after I calmed down, my fear turned to anger. Had that cheater decided to sue me on top of everything else? He would get it from me. I went to address the lawyer he'd given me, my fear forgotten. He met me at his office and led me to the meeting room where the owner of the car was waiting. But it wasn't Andrew. A smartly dressed young man was sitting there instead. The lawyer introduced him as Mr. John Davison Balforth. I said that there must have been some mistake because the car I'd smashed had belonged to the guy I was dating. And then John Davidson said Andrew had been lying to me. He was actually just an ordinary employee in John's garage, and sometimes he took the cars without permission to impress girls. He was just a loser who only owned a couple of expensive pieces of clothing. The lawyer added that Andrew had already been fired, but I would have to compensate for damaging the expensive car because I'd been the one to smash it. That's when I realized that I was in big trouble. I didn't have money like that. I begged him to please forgive me, and I explained that I was just an ordinary girl from a culinary college who'd been deceived. John Davidson looked at me, and he listened for a long time. And suddenly he asked,
"Are you really studying to be a cook?"
I said that it was true. Then he said he'd forgive me for ruining the car. However, I'd have to work off my debt in the kitchen of his house. I had no other choice, so of course I agreed. The very next day, I went to Mr. Balforth's house to get to work. The house turned out to be an actual palace. John Davidson lived with his parents in the most exclusive area of the city. He owned a lot of expensive cars, some domestic staff, and even a yacht. He was filthy rich. I was immediately shown into the kitchen, where I met an elderly Frenchman, Monsieur Paulin. He was a chef and immediately began to teach me the ways of all sorts of culinary secrets. Monsieur Paulin was very kind to me, and I thought I'd got off pretty easy. When I came back to campus that night, I immediately told Rhonda everything about the rich guy in his house. My friend told me that I had a unique chance.
"You should start seeing that John Davidson guy,"
she added excitedly. At first I felt a bit scared because he was a real aristocrat. But then I remembered my favorite fairy tale, and I realized that John was exactly what I'd always imagined a prince would be like. And long story short, I turned on all of my charm. I didn't throw myself at him, just tried to be polite and nice. And it worked. Within a few days, we were already having fun chatting whenever we had a free moment. And a week later, he asked me to call him John. He was a real prince. Intelligent, well-mannered, and he never bragged about his position in society. I adored him, and I thought he liked me too. Once, he even gave me a ride to campus in one of his cars. When I told Rhonda about it, she jumped with joy and said that we should celebrate. My friend added that she could already see my future. I would marry John, and I'd get everything I ever wanted. Then I'd introduce Rhonda to some rich friend of John's, and they would get married, and our families would be friends. This was an amazing plan, and I told her that this would all be real soon enough. A few days later, when I arrived at the Belfort's house, Monsieur Paulin met me and told me that we had a lot of work to do today. Some important guests were coming for a dinner in the evening. I spent half the day helping the chef cook the most delicious dishes, and I couldn't even find a moment to see John. Finally, the guests arrived, and Monsieur Paulin personally set the table for them. He later told me that it was a state senator and his wife with a young daughter. They'd come to introduce her to John because they were getting married soon. I couldn't believe my ears. Did things like that still happen? They didn't even know each other. But Monsieur Paulin told me that arranged marriages were common among aristocrats, and John simply couldn't avoid it. I took that news really hard, and I spent the rest of the evening lost in thought. When the guests had left, the elderly Frenchman came up to me and asked why I looked so sad. I admitted that I thought John liked me, and I thought we would be serious. Monsieur Paulin smiled gently and said that I was naive. "Rich people only ever marry other rich people. Life is not a fairy tale. and you will never meet a prince. You should realize it now, so you aren't disappointed again in the future," he said to me. I cried all the way back to my campus. I wanted to escape poverty and despair so much, but again, I had failed. Do I really have no chance at all? Please tell me in the comments. What is it I need to do to finally be happy? After all, I still want to believe that life can be just like the fairy tales.